And that's his whole, the impossible state is all about how evil the nation state is.
Yes.
As if that's the source of the evil.
Right.
As I've been saying, the model isn't the problem.
Yeah.
The model isn't the source of the evil.
Yeah.
The kufr is the source of the evil.
Yes.
The West would behave the same.
Yeah.
Under any model. Whatever model they have, they're going to be the same. It doesn't matter. And we're basically the same.
Yeah.
Regardless of what model we have, we're the same. We behave the same. How has the nation state model severely negatively impacted the religiosity of Muslims? There was a period, but that was directly the colonialist period and immediately afterwards. But over the course of time, as we got further and further away from direct colonization, you've seen the Islamic movements grow and grow and grow, and Islamic practice and religiosity has reached, mashallah, great levels. Well, not optimal, but great.
Yeah.
Mashallah, fantastic levels.
Again, as demonstrated
In the nation state.
I can see how the HT types can just run with whatever it is that they want to derive because they have their own internal.
Of course, because they're just like him, who thinks that the model is the problem. The model is the issue, and everything is determined by the model. Everything about the society is determined by the model of governance, which I think is out of touch with reality. This is people who live too much in theory, and not in the real world. Because in practice, as I've said many times, most people are not affected by government in their day-to-day life, in their choices, in what they do, and so on. What's the actual practical impact on a day-to-day basis for most people? What their government is, what their form of government is.
Like in America, comparatively, between being in America and in Malaysia, there's a stark difference.
But the difference isn't the model.
No, it's not the obvious.
This is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That you're obsessed with the model. Hallaq is obsessed with the model. Hizb ut-Tahrir is obsessed with the model, and they're all pointing to that as being the cause of the problem or the cause of the health of a society, and it's not. In my opinion, it's not. This is a deflection.
The form
for Hallaq, it's a deflection. Maybe not deliberate, but like I said in the chat, it's embedded in him to avoid acknowledging the real problem, which is kufr. That's the real source of the problem. As like I said, the West isn't going to behave differently if they have a better system.
No.
If the West had a khilafah, they'd still be the West, they'd still be the same.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any difference.
Yeah. Which is why we have Daesh types coming from West.
Yeah.
I mean, they have an appeal. It appeals to a certain type. Because again, I think people who read him and interpret him want to latch on to the criticism of
the West.
Of the West and the model in which it's created, right? The governance in which it's the model of the West. But he does acknowledge the form and the content. He doesn't just isolate the form, as in, just the state, but, without acknowledging the content. He cites the example of a knife. A knife can be used to.
Right, but that ends up contradicting his entire premise. Because his entire premise is the state, that the state is the problem. The nation state structure, the nation state model is the whole problem.
The Western model is filled with valueless, amoral systems.
Which will be the case in any system they have. This is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You're looking at the wrong thing. It has nothing to do with the model.
Yeah.
The model it's irrelevant. The model is irrelevant. It's the fact that you're disbelievers.
Right.
And having a better system or a better model of governance isn't going to suddenly make you, believers or righteous or behave like Muslims. Okay, I think that like I said, he acknowledges the power and the influence of corporations, but he's still focused on the governance model, as if the government, the model of government, has more effect and more impact on the daily life and the moral character of the society than the private sector. I don't think that's accurate. I don't think that's accurate at all.
Yeah. Sorry, at some point he says the state has to go. The state has to, what do you mean by that, mister? I mean,
Well, that's why he's getting invited by Hizb ut-Tahrir.
Yes, so that becomes sort of like a Chomsky's, like you don't provide a solution, you just give some anarchist.
Which he also says in the interview, I don't have a solution.
Right.
I don't have an alternative model. Because you don't need one. Because again, like I keep saying, the model isn't the problem. The model isn't to blame. You have to really show me how the nation-state model in Muslim countries has been a devastating force on the society.
He doesn't say that. He says that.
But you say that the nation-state is necessarily this way. And that therefore a nation-state cannot be Islamic. He says that. It's anathema to Islam, to an Islamic form of governance. No, it's not. Okay. That's because you're not a Muslim, so you don't understand.
Yeah.
If the nation-state, if the government is populated and the personnel of the state are Muslims, every Muslim understands that he's a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we're all under the sovereignty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, how? This is, you're giving, just like with HT, and just like the political Islamists, writ large, all of them, you give way too much importance to the government. You give way too much importance to the government with regards to its relationship to Islam in the society.
Yes.
And you are, in my opinion, you're misunderstanding the role of government in Muslim society. And you're misunderstanding it in a way that the early Muslims did not misunderstand it. You're ascribing a responsibility to the state, to the government, to the whatever, to the rulers, something that's not their job. Their job is to see to the affairs, the dunya affairs of everyone who's under their jurisdiction, to keep them safe, to keep them secure, to keep their needs met, and so forth. And obviously, to be Muslims. They themselves are Muslim. They have to be Muslim. You're putting so much emphasis on the model of the state, or the structure, or what have you, and you keep using, and he will even say, it's funny to me, because when he's trying to explain modernity, which he ties to the nation-state model, he can't tell you what modernity means. He says, you have to have been listening to me for 10 years to know what I mean by these terms. And he describes it as like a football that has all the hexagons on it, and each one of them is a component of modernity, and it is interlocked with the others, and then all together the whole thing is modern. You're talking about kufr.
Yeah.
That's all you're talking about is kufr. Modernity is just a euphemism for kufr. And that's what your problem is. Because surely you don't mean technology, but you mean all of the ideas. The so-called freedom and the liberty and all of this, and the complete unregulation of business and free market, and let the businesses do whatever they want and so forth. All of that's modernity. All of that's just kufr.
And the past progress.
I mean, he's right in many things that he said. In that their model takes the human being out of it.
Yes.
And any interest in the welfare of the human being. You forget that the state or the government is supposed to exist for them.
Yeah.
But the reason you are like that is because you're kuffar. This is why. It's not the model.
Yeah, and like as you have identified, that the whole authority and power of nation states are fast growing and obsolete in international affairs, but domestically they have no hesitation in meting out violence to their own population.
Yeah, but for whose sake? This is the point. This is the point that he also, and many people are behind the curve on this one, in my opinion, that the private sector is where power resides. Period. In the West, especially, power resides in the private sector, and state power, governmental power, is subordinate to the private sector.
Yeah, and the private sector not only just has wealth, it also has its private armies. It has its private.
Well, it has its, it has its private armies, but it also has the national army. Because the military is part of the state, and the state is subordinate to the private power. So, they're not going to send their military anywhere except for business interests. Like I've talked about before. what does America have to do with anything that happens in the South China Sea? It's absolutely none of your business. But it's the business of business. They're concerned. But the average American, it has no effect on you whatsoever, but it has an effect on business. So the army and the military are subordinate to the interests of business. Period. Everything is subordinate to the business, to the interests of business. And then you have the issue of the fact that because you have let corporations become transnational, multinational corporations, that ends up making them a-national corporations where they have no affiliation and loyalty or patriotism or nationalism to any particular country whatsoever. You have globalized elites. You have a floating imperial structure now that's supranational. It's above everything. It transcends borders. It floats across the world. So what does that do now to your nation state model? What is that? What are the implications and the ramifications and the repercussions of the fact that power now isn't tied to a nation state? And that changes the whole nature of colonization, the whole nature of imperialism, and the whole nature of anti-imperialism, anti-colonization. That whole thing has to change. The way that you approach that, the whole strategy with which you approach that has to change.
Mess
Right.
up their own society.
Right.
In order to be subordinate to.
No. No, because for the same reason that Wael Hallaq said that in the Islamic societies they prohibited the creation of corporations. The reason that they prohibited corporations is because they're Muslims. And the idea in Islam that everyone is accountable and liable for their actions. You can't have limited liability. You can't pretend, well, I'm not responsible because I can hide behind a corporate logo and pretend that it was they did it. America and the UK first, UK and then America allowed for corporations because they're kuffar. And they fundamentally don't believe in accountability. So that's their problem. Again, it's not that the nation state allowed corporations, it's kufr allowed corporations. And then so all we see is the manifestation now of the development of structures of power that kufr has allowed. That's all. And this isn't going to work in the Muslim world. But in terms of them being able to subsume state power, that's not a thing. That's not a thing that can happen. Because in most parts of the Muslim world, what they will call corruption protects them against that. Because the state power is tied with the private sector. In terms of ownership, the people who are in charge of the state also are in charge of the private sector. So they're not going to get subordinated because they're in control of both. And no one from the outside is going to be able to come in and overthrow them. They won't allow that.
Yeah.
This is one of the most important things that I've heard him say when he's talking about Edward Said.
Yeah.
And Edward Said, who seemingly was anti-Orientalist and was trying to correct Orientalist tropes and so on, and was critical of all of that. But he himself obviously went, okay, you're Arab, but you're Christian, which makes you a minority. And you're looking at your own region as an outsider to an extent. To an extent. Obviously you're Arab, obviously all of that's a given. But the point is, this is a Muslim region. The overwhelming majority of people are Muslim. And you're viewing it from the outside. And you would naturally have an affinity in one way or another, whether you are conscious of it or not, with the West. Because
where you are.
Yeah. Where you are and the religion you follow. Yeah. What he said was that, Edward Said, in describing something, makes that thing as he's describing it. So if you misdefine, misdescribe, and you're doing that from a center of power, then the people themselves can actually start to adapt and conform to your description and your definition. And that's what's happened with a lot of Muslims with regards to Islam and their concept of governance. in my opinion, like people like HT and the entirety of so-called political Islam, whatever they want to call themselves, Islamist or whatever they want to call themselves. The entirety of that is that you have reached your understanding about government in Islam from the kuffar. Period. And now you have become what they told you were, even though we were never that. But now there's many people who have become what the kuffar have told us we are, and have told each other that we are, so that we are misunderstanding ourselves. And this is combined with the fact that under colonization, Islamic education was greatly diminished, and de-emphasized. And the adoption of the prioritization system of the West in terms of what's valued, education became stupidly about jobs, about getting what kind of a career you can have, and whether you can become an engineer or a doctor or a lawyer or what have you. That became the sole purpose of education, whereas that was never the purpose of education in the history of Islam. The purpose of education is knowledge, period. Knowledge, understanding of the world, how to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the best, and how to benefit the Muslims. But because you adopted this system of prioritization of values of the kuffar, of the colonizers, you de-emphasized and devalued Islamic education. And then when you tried to come back to Islam, you came back to an Islam that they told you about, instead of learning actually about Islam correctly. So then you become like this political Islam. But I mean, like when he talks about the Sharia being so sophisticated, mind-blowingly, sophisticated as compared to Western jurisprudence, of course he's absolutely correct. But he's also, I don't know if he is ascribing the reason for that.
For that, I need to read what he has to say about the Sharia.
No, well, he can't say what the real problem is, and why why Sharia is the way it is, because he usually just refers to Sharia as a legal system. He can't say what the real problem is with the West, and he can't say what the real reason for the goodness is of the Sharia, except that he would become a Muslim. Because it's obvious why. There's no, I mean, he talks about the West and the nation state and so on, and that it's like bidun ethics, morality, and it takes ethics and morality and whatnot out of the state, out of government and so on. You're taking something that wasn't there to begin with. It's not there to begin with. The nation state didn't do that. Your kufr does that. And it's in every element of Islam, in jurisprudence, in creed, in aqidah, in kull shay. It's there because of Islam, because of iman. That's why it's there. That's why we have a heightened level, because religion isn't about ethics. It's about understanding reality. It's about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like I've said many times, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala telling us what reality is. And the reality of ourselves, the reality of the dunya, the reality of the akhirah, all of that is explained to us. And that's what deen is. Actually understanding reality and how to function in reality with that understanding. When you have the understanding of what reality is, then you know how to behave. And Allah gives us all of the ways of behaving, and that's why we have a level of heightened sophistication and complexity in our legal system. And why a qadi from some village in some province has a more brilliant legal mind and a more complex and sophisticated mind than the top legal scholars in the West, in all of the history of the West. Just a regular average village qadi has the capacity to understand more and to comprehend more and to understand nuance and how you have to very, very carefully and meticulously, what you have to do meticulously to arrive at a fair judgment. He understands it at a level that eclipses even the best legal minds of the West. But it's because of Islam. It's because Islam taught us how reality is and what our role is and how we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to function. But you are in the darkness. So you come up with things, and it's always simplistic. It's always wrong. It's always, misguided. Yeah. So you'll come up with your model of government, but you don't get to blame the model of government for why you are the way you are and why your society is the way it is. It's your fault. It's just because that's how you are. No matter what model you come up with, it's not going to work because the model's not the problem. And I don't think that the model is a problem for us. One model or another model, because we are what we are, regardless of what the model is.
Which is why people like the HD types can actually say Malaysia is you can actually go so far as to say that it's a kafir country, or
of course they will say it's a kafir system. They'll say it's a kufr system.
It's a secular system, or just because you have the civil courts, therefore it's secular, and the Gulf countries, it's all secular, like you don't have a public holiday on the Jummah. Oh, you're turning secular because Friday is not a public holiday anymore.
Yeah, because you understand Islam in a way that was taught to you by kuffar.
Correct. This is
And because an Islamic society is an abstraction for you.
Whereas we understand
Muslims in the Muslim world, their societies, like I've said, have just been developing on a continuum, and I honestly don't believe that they would be considerably different now than if what happened in 1924 hadn't happened in 1924. Certainly Malaysia wouldn't be any different. Malaysia wasn't impacted in any way. Indonesia wasn't impacted in any way whatsoever by Ataturk, what Ataturk did. They were impacted by colonization. They were impacted by the British and the Portuguese. Yeah, the model is irrelevant. In my opinion, really. Wallahi, I think that the model is completely irrelevant. If your government is populated by Muslims, all of those Muslims will try to make decisions in line with Sharia, because every individual Muslim is bound to the Sharia.
Yes. That's why it's important to recognize the form as well as the content. If it's kufr based, then it's useless what the form is, right?
Of course. And if the content is iman based, similarly the model is irrelevant. I mean, that's my opinion anyway.